In this video, we're going to learn how to convert decimals to fractions. So our learning target is I can convert any decimal to its equivalent fraction in simplest form. And in order to do this, we're going to look at some examples. So let's start with the first example, 0.3. So if I'm looking at this number, I look at the 3, and I think about the place value that the 3 is in. The 3 is in the tenths place. So if I can remember that this decimal actually says 0 and 3/10, it's going to be very simple for me to convert it to a fraction. I like to start always by starting with the whole number. The whole number is 0 in this case, so I'm going to write a 0. And because that 3 is in the tenths place, I can write it as a fraction with 10 in the denominator and 3 in the numerator. So I have 0 and 3/10. If we have a 0 in the whole number, we don't actually need to write the 0, so I can cross it out. And therefore, our final answer is just 3/10 by itself. So now you're going to try an example, 0.7. So take a minute to figure out what this would look like as a fraction. So let's talk about how you found your answer. So again, we're looking at the 7. It's in the tenths place, and so I actually know that this decimal says 0 and 7/10. And as good practice, I like to put the 0 there still. And then I can make my fraction with the denominator of 10 and the numerator of 7. Again, I don't need the 0 when I'm writing it as a fraction if the whole number is 0. So my final answer is just 7/10. Let's look at another one that's a little bit more complicated. This one is 0.8, and you might be thinking that's very similar to the ones we just did, but let's talk it through. So again, the 8 is in the tenths place, so I know that I can read this as 0 and 8/10. So I can start with the whole number of 0, and then I can have my denominator of 10, and my numerator is 8. Again, I don't need that 0 because it's a whole number and it has a value of 0, so we don't need to write it. But with 8/10, we can actually simplify this fraction. You might be wondering what simplifying a fraction means. So let's look at what 8/10 looks like as a fraction. So this is a model of what 8/10 would look like. You see my pie is cut into 10 pieces, and I have 8 of them shaded in. So when we're simplifying a fraction, we're thinking about, can I cut my pie into bigger pieces, meaning fewer pieces altogether, and still have an fraction that would be equivalent to 8/10? So if you look at this example, there's my same size pie, but instead it's cut into 5 pieces. And if I shade in 4 of them, that's still equal to 8/10, but instead I have 4/5. Now you won't always be able to draw it so perfectly, and so it will be difficult sometimes to see how you can find an equivalent fraction using a model. So there's a way to do this mathematically. We'll start by listing the factors of both 8 and 10. 8 and 10 are our numerator and denominator. So we need to start by listing the factors of both of those numbers. So a method that I like to use is called the F method. And I write 2 F's next to each of those numbers, and I will list the factors of each, starting with 8. So with 8, I have 1 times 8, and then the next number that comes after 1 is 2. So I have 2, and 2 times 4 is going to give me 8. The number that comes after 2 is 3, and I know that I can't multiply 3 by any whole number to get 8. The number after 3 is 4, and I know that I already have a 4 here at the bottom, so I can know that I'm finished listing all the factors of 8. Let's look at 10. So for 10, I have 1 times 10, and then I have 2 times 5. The next number would be 3, and I know I can't multiply 10 or 3 by a whole number to get 10. The next number is 4. I can't multiply 4 by any whole number to get 10. And then the number after that is 5, and I already have a 5, so I know I'm finished with my factors. So now we're going to look at both of the factors that I listed of 8 and 10, and we're going to think about what factor do they have in common. Well, they have a 1 in common, but that's going to be true of any number. So instead, what I want to look at is the greatest common factor, the highest number that they have in common. And in this case, it's 2. So So I'm going to use 2, and I'm going to divide both my numerator and my denominator by that same number. And because 2 is a factor of both 8 and 10, I know that that's possible. So let's start with the numerator 8. So I'm going to, again, divide it by 2. And then the good thing is I already did all of the work for 8 divided by 2, because under the 2, paired it up with it over here in the F next to the 8, I have the number 4. So I know that 8 divided by 2 is 4. And then next we're going to look at 10. Of course, we're going to use the 2, so we're going to do 10 divided by 2. And I already know that 10 divided by 2 is 5 because I already did that in the factor method over here. So I can see that my final answer will be 4/5. So it's your turn. So you're going to write the below decimal in its equivalent fraction form, and you're going to make sure to simplify your fraction before typing in your final answer. So go ahead and take a minute to do that now. Okay, let's look at the number that you got. So again, we're going to look at that 4, and it's in the 10ths place. I'm going to write my 0 whole number, 10 as the denominator, 4 as the numerator. And I don't need that 0, but I can simplify this number. Just like we did before, we're going to start by listing the factors of 4 and the factors of 10. So the factors of 4 I have are 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. I'm already repeating numbers at the bottom, so I know that I'm finished. For 10, like we did before, we have 1 and 10, 2 and 5, and there are no others. And again, with this number, they have 2 in common. So I'm going to start by dividing the numerator by 2. And because I already paired up the factors over here, I know it's going to be 2. And then I'm going to divide the denominator by 2. And again, because I already paired up the factors over here, I know that 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. So my final answer for this is 2/5. Let's look at a slightly more complicated example. So in this case, my decimal is greater than 1 whole. So again, I'm going to look at the decimal as a whole. So I'm going to start with that whole number, which is 2. And if I look at the decimal side of this number, I see that I have 23. And then instead, this 3, instead of being in the 10ths place, is actually in the 100ths place. So the way to read this decimal is actually 2 and 23/100ths. So I have my 2 as the whole number, and then in the fraction, I'm going to put 100 as the denominator instead of 10. And then my numerator is going to be 23. And this fraction actually can't even be simplified. This is actually called a mixed number because it has a whole number and a fraction put together. And it can't be simplified. There's no way to make the numerator and denominator smaller by dividing them by the same number. So you're going to try an example. You're going to write the below decimal in its equivalent fraction form. So work this out on your own and then type in your answer. Okay, so let's look at what you got. So again, we're going to start with that whole number 6. And then we're going to write the fraction that goes next to it. That 7 is in the 100ths place again. So I'm going to have 6 and 47/100ths, which looks like the 6 whole number. The fraction is going to have 100 in the denominator and then the 47 in the numerator. So the final answer here is 6 and 47/100ths. And again, this fraction can't be simplified either, just like the last example. Let's look at another example. So this one, again, is even slightly more complicated because it is greater than 1 whole, and it also will be able to be simplified. So we're going to look at that together. So again, I have 3.16. So I'm going to start by writing my whole number, and then I'm going to write the decimal portion as the fraction next to it. Again, that 6 is in the 100ths place, so I read this number as 3 and 16/100ths. So I'm going to put 100 in the denominator and then 16 in the numerator. Now, we can simplify 16/100ths. So when we simplify fractions, we're just looking at the fraction part. We are not concerned with the whole number because the whole number will stay the same, and we'll look at that at the end. So instead, what we're going to do is list the factors of 16 and 100. So I'm going to make my F's next to each of those numbers to help me list the factors and keep them organized. So for 16, I have 1 and 16, and then 2 and 8. I know that I can't multiply 3 by any whole number to get 16, so the next number is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. And now that I'm already repeating numbers at the bottom, I know that I'm finished with all of my factors of 16. Let's look at 100. I have 1 and 100, 2 times 50. I know I can't do 3 times anything to get 100, so I'm going to do 4 times 25, 5 times 20, 5 times 20. And then if I keep going, 6, I can't multiply by a whole number to get 100. Can't do 7 either. Can't do 8. Can't do 9. But then if I go to 10, I know that 10 times 10 is 100. And now I'm starting to repeat numbers at the bottom, so I don't need to go any further with looking for factors of 100. So these two numbers have quite a few factors in common. They have 1, they also have 2, and they have 4. Again, we're going to look at the greatest common factor, the highest number that they have in common, and in this case, it's 4. So I'm going to start by dividing my numerator of 16 by this number 4. So we're going to do 16 divided by 4, and I already did the work because I have the 4 over here paired up with this 4, so I know that 16 divided by 4 is going to be 4. Next, I'm going to divide 100 by 4. So we're going to put 100 divided by 4 over here. And I already did the work because I paired up the factors. So I can see that 100 divided by 4 is 25. And then before you write your final answer, you need to remember to bring over that whole number. The whole number 3 will often get disappeared when we're simplifying fractions. So we want to make sure we don't forget about it. So instead of 3 and 1600ths, I have 3 and 4 25ths. And that is the final answer. So now you're going to try an example. You're going to write the below decimal in its equivalent fraction form. You're going to make sure to simplify your fraction before typing in your final answer. So take a minute to figure out what this number would look like as a fraction in simplest form. Okay, let's go over how you found your answer. So again, we're going to take our number and we're going to write the 14 as the whole number because I know that's not going to change. And then if I look at the fraction part, which is really the decimal point of the number, which is 0.35, I know that the 5 is in the hundredths place. So I read this as 14 and 35 hundredths. So to write it, you would write 100 in the denominator and 35 in the numerator. But I can actually simplify this fraction. So I'm going to list the factors of both 35 and 100. So we're going to start with 35. So for 35, we have 1 times 35. I know I can't multiply 2 by anything to get 35, or 3 by any whole number to get 35, or 4 by any whole number to get 35. But I do know I can multiply 5 by something. And if I figure out my multiples of 5, I know that 5 times 7 is 35. I know I can't multiply 6 by anything to get 35, and then the number after 6 is 7, and I already have a 7 at the bottom here. So I know that I can stop. Now for 100, we just did this one a minute ago, so we're going to walk through it quickly. We have 1 times 100, 2 times 50, 4 times 25, 5 times 20, and 10 times 10. And if I'm looking at these factors, they do have a few in common. They have 1, but they also have 5, and 5 is much bigger than 1. So we're going to stick with 5 for now. So in order to simplify this, we have to divide the numerator and the denominator by that common factor of 5. So we're going to start with the numerator. And I know 35 divided by 5, I already know is 7 because I already paired up my factors here. So I know that it's going to be 7. If I do 100 divided by 5, again, I already paired up my factors. So I know that 100 divided by 5 is 20. And then I'm not going to forget again about that whole number 14. So I'm going to remember to bring that over at the end. And then 14 and 7/20 is the final answer. So we just did 8 problems together for converting decimals to fractions. I hope this helped a lot. Feel free to watch this video more than once if you need any extra help.